Sorry we're getting started a few minutes late this morning, but it's great to see all of you. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Karen Tucker, and I am the CEO and a board member of the Churchill Club. And this morning we present the Honorable John Chiang, Controller of the State of California, and Michael Moritz, well-known and respected venture capitalist with Sequoia Capital. John and Mike, thank you very much for joining us to speak this morning. I'd like to say that this program is very generously sponsored by Microsoft, and we definitely appreciate their support. So I'd like to ask you to help me thank Microsoft this morning. And our co-host and partner is Sonnenschein, Nathan Rosenthal, and I would like to give a special nod to Yabo Lin. There are several guests in the audience whom I would like to acknowledge. Please raise your hand if you would as I mention your name. We have the Mountain View Mayor, Margaret Abe Koga.
Yay, Margaret.
And we have the Mountain View Vice Mayor, Ronit Bryant. And from District 4, Santa Clara County Supervisor Ken Yeager. And from the office of Liz Niss, President of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, representing District 5, Patty Malapine. Thank you all for joining us as well. Let me mention quickly our next two evening programs, both of which will include dinner. On Thursday, July 23rd, we present The Free Economy, How Companies Make Money from Giving Things Away, with Chris Anderson, the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, author of the popular book The Long Tail, and the brand new book called Free, The Future of a Radical Price, with a great panel of speakers. And on Thursday, July 30, we present New Rules, New Opportunities, China 2010, with a panel of distinguished experts looking forward relative to doing business in China. So we hope you will consider joining us for those programs. For those of you less familiar with the Churchill Club, it is the premier business and technology forum in the Bay Area with 6,000 members and a 23-year history. Dynamic in the news programs. We are a not-for-profit organization supported by members, and we do hope that you will consider joining us if you are not a member. You can always find us at churchillclub.org, also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And now it is a great privilege to introduce our moderator, Michael Moritz, one of the most influential venture capitalists of our day. In the past 4 years, Michael was twice #1 and twice #2 on the Forbes Midas list. He is presently a partner at Sequoia Capital, where since 1986 he has focused on software and services investments, such as Google, where he sat on the board, and Yahoo, PayPal, Zappos, and frankly dozens of other wildly successful companies. And prior to finding his considerable groove as a VC, Michael worked in a variety of positions at Time Warner, including as a journalist covering tech. He was also a founder of Technologic Partners. Michael, we are very honored to have you back on our stage. Please help me welcome Michael Moritz.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be on the delivery end of questions. The topic this morning is another, as we all know, not-for-profit organization, the state of California. I noticed, John, looking through the list last night of former occupants of your role. There was a gentleman called Alan Cranston, who obviously went on to serve a distinguished career as a senator for California. There was a gentleman called Gray Davis, whom I know you know well, who went on to become the governor. And I was also going back down the list, and I noticed there was a gentleman who was the state controller, whose name was John Chambers. But he served between 1913 and 1921, and he did not go on to become the CEO of Cisco Systems. So maybe to begin with, I think maybe you can do some scene setting, because I suspect most people in the audience, just like me, are really uncertain about how broad an ambit you as the state controller preside over. So maybe you can give us a sense of the full extent of the panoply of duties that are resident in the office of the state controller of California.
I'd be happy to do so, Mike. The state controller is one of 8 statewide elected officials here in California. In the executive branch of government, and we remember from our civics lessons, there's 3 branches of government. There are 12 residents in the executive branch, 8 elected statewide. I am the chief fiscal officer for California. I am not the chief financial officer. We also have a state treasurer who handles the treasury functions for California. So he's in essence the state's banker. I have responsibilities including the accounting, some of the auditing. There are 3 principal agencies in state government that are responsible for auditing. The function that many of us are well aware of now, I am the cash manager, and I'm responsible for disbursements for California's obligations. And so I issue about 42 million disbursements annually. I serve on 76 different authorities, including the State Lands Commission, which has the jurisdictions for development from mean high tide out to 3 miles off the coast of California. I serve on a whole host of financing authorities, so every time the voters of California pass a bond, I usually end up on one of those financing authorities. And I also sit on the state's 2 principal taxing agencies, the Board of Equalization, which is responsible for about 25 different tax and fee programs, and the Franchise Tax Board, which is the income tax authority for the state of California.
And in your spare time?
Then I serve on 2 other boards, CalPERS and CalSTRS, which are the nation's 2 largest public pension plans. As Mike pointed to when I sat next to him at the Israel Chamber of Commerce, it's too complicated, and so you don't want to get involved with us, even though we could use your formidable talents.
So I have actually a little exhibit here that truly arrived in the mail 2 days ago. And John, I'd like you to read the name in the top left-hand corner.
Well, it's my name. It's one of our disbursements. It's not the color of a registered warrant, though.
No, because among other things, this gentleman looks after the lost and found property department of the state of California. And I've been trying to get hold of this check for 2 years, and it finally arrived.
Oh, very good. Actually, let me refer to that. It's a program called Unclaimed Property. What occurs is if you have no activity with a financial institution, that property under the law could escheat to the state of California. So that's why I keep active management of your accounts with financial institutions, insurance companies, utilities. Now, 20 years ago, when Governor Wilson was the governor, and I'm not attaching blame because I think it's important, we see what happened when we attach too much blame in government, it becomes dysfunctional. But in another difficult budget period, the governor and legislature had to take some dramatic action. They increased taxes significantly, they cut significant spending, but they also took action which was not to the benefit of Californians. They made it more difficult for the owners of the property that you just demonstrated to get their property back. So over this 20-year period of time, the state is now in possession of over $5 billion worth of your property and 8 million accounts. When I became controller, I said, this is wrong. It's part of why we have bad fiscal management here in California, because we're holding on to people's rightful property for the state to balance its budget. I was able to convince the governor and the legislature, and I want to give them credit for finally recognizing that it's time to right a wrong. And so I now have the legal authority to communicate to all of you without it being illegal on my behalf to tell you that the state has your property. So in the first year after I was able to change the law, we sent out 2.5 million notices to people saying, we have your property. In the 10-year prior to that, we only sent out 1.2 million notices because it was only proper for the previous controllers to notify about 16 to 20% of the account holders. I can notify 100%. I don't have the financial resources to do so. And usually I do have my staff do some research on your names and do it, but I just didn't do it this morning because I figured I'd be talking to Mike.
So, well, I think I received about 1.8 million of those notices, and I got to be on very familiar terms with a very nice lady called Marcy, who works about 28 layers below you somewhere, who finally got me the check. But I think to turn to the main topic, I think when many of us came to California, maybe 30 years or so ago now, California probably had a reputation around the world as the place that knows how. And I think if you go around the world today, people look at California and say, is California the ghost of the future for the United States? And it'd be very interesting, John, to start with getting a perspective from you of how acute you think the dilemma is that faces the state today. And perhaps if you could be kind enough and compare it to past predicaments that the state has confronted as well.
Yeah, we are in very dire straits at this particular juncture in California's life. We've had times that have been very, very difficult. The way they resolved prior issues, unfortunately, has exacerbated the problem that we're experiencing today. We have a budget deficit for the upcoming fiscal, or it's now, we're in this fiscal year, of $26 billion. Now, the cash deficit is actually greater. To give you a perspective of where we are positionally year over year, last year, the worst point cash-wise for the state would have been in April. We didn't get to that point because the governor and legislature came to agreement in February trying to fix a earlier problem. But if we had continued on that path, the state would have been $5.3 billion in the red. So if you thought it was bad in February when I had to take some rather dramatic action to keep the state of California from defaulting on our debt obligations, I had to hold back your tax refunds for 30 days. I did not make contributions to the federal government for SSP payments, which are the payments to the most vulnerable populations here in California, the aged, the blind, disabled. I had to hold up payments to students seeking higher education in terms of their Cal Grants. I didn't make payments to large private sector vendors. It could have been, I don't know if Microsoft was one of those vendors who contracts with the state for goods and services. So $5 billion cash red in April we could have gotten. The worst estimated point, before we haven't made all the adjustments, when the state was at a $24 billion deficit 2 weeks ago, is $25 billion cash red in April of next year. That is how challenging the situation is for California today. Now, we can fix this. It requires...
Sorry to interrupt. Has the state ever faced a deficit or looming deficit of that magnitude?
No, not even in adjusted for inflation and other considerations.
Maybe you don't, but do you know what the previous largest number was?
We were at numbers. It's in a ballpark. 17 to 19 with our budget half the size during Governor Wilson's time. Mm-hmm. So the expected budget last year was between $102 and $104 billion for general fund revenues. General fund revenues are personal income taxes, sales taxes, corporate taxes. Those are the big three for state tax revenues here in California, and then there's some other components to it. As of the end of May, and you can go on my website, one of the things I became controller, I wanted to make sure that everybody could see the state's numbers. We were at $73 billion. So we were far short of what was the original budget for this last fiscal year.
Mm-hmm. So 26, so you're how far are we away? We're, 40 weeks away from a $25 billion black hole. So what are some of the tools that are at your disposal in order to help fix that issue?
Sure. Let me go over the cash management steps for the state of California. Number one is general fund revenues, which I just spelled out what the major three are. This second is what is called special funds, internal borrowables. In the state, there are over 1,000 different special funds. 710 of them we can borrow from. So let me give you an example of a special fund. There is a disaster recovery fund. If we have an earthquake here in California, if we have wildfires, they take those monies and they go correct whatever emergency that we have occurring in California. Another special fund is oil spill prevention fee. If we have an oil spill off the coast of California, you use those monies to clean up an oil spill. If those monies are not being used, the state can borrow from it. And in essence, that's what we've been doing to too great an extent. This state has not been net cash positive, meaning using the general funds and being in the black since July 12, 2007. So we've been operating in the red to the tune of, it's going to be $19 billion. It could bump up to $22 billion. We asked the authority to borrow the last $2 billion. If we didn't borrow that money, right, we would be in more dramatic straits. The third area where we handle cash is external borrowing. We go out to the markets for short-term borrowings called RANs, which are notes, and RAWs, which are warrants. We rather use RANs because they are much cheaper than RAWs. If I can use a loose equivalent, RAWs are the equivalent of a subprime mortgage, so they're considerably more expensive. The governor stopped my authority to go out for RAWs this summer because part of it is he wanted to put more heat on the legislature to come to agreement. But I also agreed with him in a greater sense because the expense of those borrowings is pretty costly to the taxpayers of California. So you don't want to rely on them too much. The fourth is the governor and the legislature coming to agreement. The fifth cash management step is cash deferrals. It's what I did in February. It's not the same as IOUs. Cash deferrals are you just wait a period of time until you actually pay your bill. So for instance, if I draw a household example, let's say you get your paycheck the first of each month, and you have insufficient funds to pay your mortgage bill, your utility bill, your credit card bill. So you want to stay in your house so you pay your mortgage bill. Let's say you don't get another paycheck until 2 weeks later, while you still have your credit card bill and your utility bill set aside. So you don't pay those bills, even though you may have a fee, until you get your next paycheck. That's in essence what we were doing in February. We were not paying our bills until we had sufficient cash in the state treasury. And then the sixth step is issuing IOUs, or technically registered warrants. Now, you don't want to use IOUs unless you really have to, because there's other implications, such as further deterioration in your credit rating. California is already the lowest credit rated state in America. We were just downgraded a few days ago again by Fitch, so, and then we're waiting for Standard & Poor's. But clearly the costs are tremendous to the taxpayers of California when we are at the lowest investment grade rating.
So tell us a little bit about that first borrowing acronym, the RANs. How deep in the hole is the state there, and how much extra borrowing power do you have, and who are the buyers?
Well, the RANs, right now, Bill Lockyer, the state treasurer, is responsible for selling the RANs. He's indicated because of our credit rating, because of more importantly, the fact that we don't have a prudent and credible budget in place, nobody wants to really go out and purchase a RAN. If we have a budget in place, it's still going to be very difficult because the capacity available in the market today. California is a huge borrower, and we also have powerful downstream impacts. In fact, some people have drawn an analogy. We're sort of the Lehman Brothers. If California screws up, technical term, with what's happening today, it's going to have huge implications for other state jurisdictions, other local jurisdictions in terms of their borrowing.
And who are the purchasers, though, of these notes? Are they largely domestic or international?
Principally domestic. Bill Lockyer, started first with a retail sales, even though you still have a lot of institutions who are purchasing it, and then they'll provide it to their clients at smaller denominations at about $5,000.
So one thing that perhaps people are interested in hearing is your assessment. You've been deeply interested in a public servant of the state in different capacities and guises for many years. Your assessment of the principal reasons how the state has got into the predicament it has gotten into today.
Yeah, there's a whole host of reasons. I state if you have 5 responsible leaders, and I'm not saying the current leadership is irresponsible, but if you can build an institution around 5 responsible leaders who understand that we reside in a democracy, and ideologically you do not get everything you want. People have to compromise, people have to sacrifice, especially in these especially difficult times, and that you have to find common bonds and an agreement, and you have to do so on a timely basis. And if we could start off with this group and build it institutionally. One of the things that Gray Davis was publicly correct about, but ultimately didn't get to that point because there's too much political pressure, is that we live through business cycles, and the state government is the recipient of the good fortune and the bad fortune of what's occurring in the private sector. And we have to be very smart and prudent about how we handle the state's finances in view of that thought. So in good years, we ought to be building a rainy day fund or a savings account for when inevitably the bad years occur. There is a phenomenon in Sacramento where everybody wants to score immediate political points. That's exacerbated by the fact that there's term limits. So when you have assembly members who are there for 6 years, right, they can't, the constituency aren't going to say, oh, I'm going to pat you on the back because you saved $12 billion, because they don't see the benefit. Everybody wants that money spent now, whether it's the Democrats who principally support education and healthcare, or it's the Republicans who want tax cuts and other types of incentives. We have to build that internal discipline. So number 1, responsible leadership. Number 2, building a rainy day account. You could add term limits as a fix. I know among the electorate of California, for some it's very popular to have 2/3 vote for increasing taxes and 2/3 vote to pass a budget. We're the only state to have both those requirements. I think that's an impediment. I understand the desire not to increase taxes, but at our core, part of the dysfunction in Sacramento is who do you hold accountable if you can't pass a budget? Do you hold the majority party, which does not have controlling authority to pass a budget, accountable? Or do you hold 3 Republicans in the state Senate and Assembly accountable? And which 3 do you hold? Because you can't find those 3 to pass a budget. When you have a democracy where you can't have transparency, accountability, I think it's very frustrating for the electorate. And that's part of our civic disengagement, the disconnect that's being created. And it's not healthy for America's enterprise or California's enterprise in the long term.
So there was I'm sure a lot of people read this, there was a long story in the New York Times Magazine last Sunday about all the people, or a variety of different people vying for the gubernatorial position in the next election. Gavin Newsom and Meg Whitman and Jerry Brown and Tom Campbell and an array of others. And it was a long and thoughtful piece, which I sort of read with great interest, but did wonder as I was leafing through it, no matter what your political inclination is, or no matter what you think about these candidates, or how able or talented each or all of them are, whether California has approached the point that it is essentially an ungovernable state. What's your sense of that?
No. The governor in a bad year has 85% of the power in Sacramento. In a good year, the governor has 99% of the power. Within the responsibilities of the governor is to be a consensus builder. Part of that requires a tremendous focus of energy and time in trying to build the relationships with the institutions, with the individual elected officials, so that you can identify at what point you can compromise and do that. Now, it's going to be very difficult. If, for instance, if you're a Republican where 67% of your base is very conservative, to increase any types of taxes is almost a end of your political career statement. Not exactly, but so you have to find in working, and you clearly have those types of issues on the Democratic side, where are the pressure points, where are the points of compromise, so that you can come to those points much easier and faster in a deliberative process. So if you have, whether it's Meg Whitman, Gavin Newsom, Jerry Brown, Steve Poizner, Tom Campbell, they're going to have to start early on. And so there's going to have to be, you have it in a campaign where you're making these extreme, fixed statements. Governance doesn't work like that. So there's a person while you're campaigning, and there's a person once you're in a leadership role.
So there was also, I think, in this article that I was alluding to, there was comments about the need for a constitutional amendment in the state to get rid of some of these voting thresholds that you were just talking about. What's your opinion of that? Is that something that you think would be a healthy thing long-term for the sort of fiscal, prudent fiscal management of the state?
I would be strongly supportive. I think once you release the valves of the structural mechanisms, people will become more responsible, right? I know people are fear that the Democrats are going to tax us to death. The Democrats are also very astute. They want to assume positions of leadership. So they understand where their constituencies are upset with them. They're not going to have, they may test, some of them may want to test the margins, but a lot of them will say, no, we're not going to go there because we don't want to be the minority party.
Now, slightly different topic, and I ask this without any particular bias, but I think, again, you read the press and various critics, there's a lot of finger-pointing aimed at the high degree of unionization in the state of the public sector workforce as a big part of the issue for the predicament the state is in today. I'm sure you have an opinion about that and you've thought about it. What is it?
Well, the unions, along with other groups, healthcare groups, business groups, and you can certainly break, all have tremendous influence in the political process. That's why it's critical that in our democracy that you have people elevate and participate in as many ways as possible. When you have 6 to 8 groups who are actively participatory in our democracy in Sacramento, that fully doesn't represent the cross spectrum of California. So it's important that others participate so that you can get more balance. Not only in electoral politics, but certain public policy development is absolutely critical.
But also, I think we've reached the point where, again, if these facts are correct, there are at least 5,000 state employees, former state employees, who now draw pensions well in excess of $100,000 a year. Have you taken any steps to sort of trim those sorts of fixed costs that will only escalate, or costs that will only escalate and be more of a burden for the future of the state?
Yeah, I've pointed out a lot of those concerns because they have huge long-term implications and creation of liability for the state's finances. In fact, one of the first things I did as the controller 2.5 years ago is I did a study on the state's OPEB obligation. For those of you who are not familiar with OPEB, it's the other post-employee benefits. It's, in essence, your health care obligations of the state. If we want to get a handle on what the obligations in the long term are, you should do the study. Now, I was required under GASB 43 and 45, the accounting rules, to disclose that information. But I was not required to disclose that information until, I'm not even required to disclose that information until next year. But I did it 2 years in advance because I wanted the state to have the upfront opportunities plus the time value of that study to take action. So for instance, we use it on a pay-as-you-go basis here in California. The obligation in our second study, because we've done 2 studies over a 30-year period of time, to the taxpayers of California would be $48.2 billion. However, if we fully pre-funded that obligation, the drop in that cost would decrease by $17 billion. Now, the governor started to look at it. We're still waiting action, so over the long term, we can protect the California taxpayers' pocketbooks by funding these obligations early so that we have the investment power taking place. But clearly, and part of the reference in terms of your numbers, there are some jurisdictions that allow for pension spiking. I'm opposed to that. We want to make sure we stop those other types of liabilities that are going to have devastating impact to California's fiscal health.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about taxes, and then perhaps we should open the floor up to questions. The state obviously is in the forefront of clean air and emissions control and stricter fuel standards on cars. What's your opinion about a hefty gas tax, not just on oil that's extracted from California, but California being in the vanguard of putting a big tax on the price of every gallon of gasoline taken out of a pump on every street corner in California?
I'm open to that possibility. It's not popular. It's not popular with the electorate, right? And I don't want to take the gas tax issue in isolation, right? You have to balance all the taxes here in California. And I think our tax system is unwieldy. It's burdensome. We have too many taxes and fees. If we want to increase economic opportunity, make it easier for businesses to comply, we have to winnow the number of tax and fee programs we have in California. But the ones we do focus on, we ought to do correctly. And part of that is if you're going to use energy consumption, if you're trying to think about long-term benefits, if you're trying to drive people to mass transportation. We have a dilapidated infrastructure here in California. We ought to think about the use of those the gas tax to fix the highways of California. Else, we're going to have to think about other financing structures for our infrastructure here in California. And that means going out to the private sector. And part of the discussion is, do we want to send our state's assets, put it in the hands, and try to figure out, creating toll roads? Do people want a gas tax, or do you want to pay tolls and fees on the use of highways, right? You have to make choices.
One other tax, and probably, it's a topic that every time that California spirals towards the edge of oblivion, it always comes back. Prop 13. What are your thoughts today, again, having thought about this a lot, I'm sure, about what should happen with property taxes in the state of California?
Prop 13 was passed by the voters in 1978, went into effect shortly thereafter, rolled back base rates to 1975. It's changed the way we've governed here in California. As I mentioned, the big three general fund revenues here in California are income taxes, sales taxes, corporate taxes. You notice I didn't mention property taxes. And so they shifted a lot of the responsibilities that historically have been financed by property taxes in other jurisdictions, and I think it's created dysfunction, right? There is a discussion now about sending education back to the local level where local elected officials, and we have some terrific ones in the room, Margaret, Ken, where they can handle their finances and you can hold your local officials more accountable. I think we ought to do that. Frankly, it would relieve some of the tension at the state level. It would create a more participatory and healthy democracy when you can go to Ken or Margaret and say, hey, I don't like if you sat on school boards, saying, I don't like that, and their response would be, well, I don't control our financing because state handles our financing, and we only get as much money as they give to us, even though this is historically a local revenue stream. So that was created by Prop 13, so if we can, in essence, push a lot of that back down to the local level, including a lot of those property tax levies, but trying to control for the legitimate concerns they had about Prop 13. You don't want to have appreciation going out of control where you have rising tax values where people of limited income are placed in jeopardy and no longer be able to stay at their...
Do you get a sense in Sacramento, is there a groundswell that politicians are detecting about revisiting Proposition 13 and undoing some of the aspects of Proposition 13? There
is discussion. I wouldn't say a groundswelling. There's a handful of legislators on both sides who want to reassess it.
One final question for you. Among the 76, I think, commissions that you said you are associated with or involved in, both CalPERS and CalSTRS fall under part of your purview. Maybe, particularly for people like us who are in the business area or in the investment business, these two entities where they are involved create a very long shadow. Give us a picture of the state and the condition of both of those funds today, if you would.
Yeah, obviously, as with a lot of other pension funds, we've took a dramatic hit. CalPERS at its peak was about $260 billion. We're a little north of $180 billion. CalSTRS was at about 160, and today we're at about 118.4, 118.9. We clearly had to expand our range within the asset classes to give us more flexibility. Issues such as securities lending, capital calls. So we had to move our assets into the cash position or cash-like equivalents to preserve all the challenges that we're facing.
And how many of in particular, the capital calls for obligations to various investment funds, have those two massive entities been defaulting on?
We're not defaulting. We're negotiating a lot of them. Frankly, from our perspective, we think this is a long-term healthy development. Obviously, you don't want to see a significant drop in the value of your portfolio, but we thought, especially in the alternative investment space, there was not tremendous quality, right? We see quality, and we want to build long-term solid partnerships. Maybe you want to reevaluate, and it gives us the ability to negotiate fees, right? It became very standard on the 2 and 20, and for a lot of these investments, people weren't deserving of 2 and 20.
That's right. That's right. Okay. What about questions? I'm sure there are lots. What about Ovi?
To follow up, on the discussion of RANDs and California's credit rating, can you speak a little bit about the safety of or the reliability of future coupon payments for California's municipal general obligation bonds, and your thoughts around those?
Well, the state has never defaulted on a general obligation payment. It's our most important responsibility. That's my task. If you've heard or seen any of my public statements, I am handling the cash flow so that the state doesn't go off the cliff. And what's the definition of going off the cliff? California defaulting on our debt obligation. Now, under the California Constitution, debt service is not our top obligation. If you look at, as required by law, what California's priority for payments are, number one is education, and that was selected by the voters of California. Number two is debt service. So California is either the only state or one of a handful of states that lists debt service second in terms of priority of payments. And then we have other priority payments such as pension obligations to CalPERS and CalSTRS, all right, because those are contractual and protected by law. We also have payroll payments, and then we have Medi-Cal payments. Now, the payments that fall below the line and are not protected payments, and then there's also special funds payments. That's the third category. The income tax refunds, that's why those received the IOUs. That's why I had to do the deferrals. The payments to the federal government for the SSP contribution by the state. The private sector vendor payments, the payments to county government for local assistance programs, such as for the developmentally disabled. Those are payments that are not protected under the law. However, that doesn't mean they won't be protected under the law. This situation that we're in today is very tenuous. So as I begin to issue these registered warrants and they expand into different categories, I'm sure there's going to be enhanced litigation. And so some of these categories may fall into protected payments or climb into protected payments. So for instance, in '92, the second time the state of California issued IOUs, we issued IOUs for payroll payments to the public servants of California. They sued, they were successful, and that's why it is a protected payment, and that's why they don't receive IOUs today. It's a violation of federal law.
John, thanks for being so candid. My name is Isan Katir. I'm a portfolio manager. I've been looking for precedents, and a friend in Argentina told me that in 2001, a state there issued IOUs called Patacones, and I wonder if you, we're not Argentina, I wonder if you would compare the differences or similarities between that, if you're familiar with the IOUs issued by a state in Argentina a couple years ago.
I am not, but I believe actually it was either Argentina or Chile, which I try to use as an example. During one of their heydays, the legislature, as we've witnessed too often here in California, was advocating spending all the money for programs or providing tax breaks. They had this one lonely accountant who said, no, we got to keep this in a lockbox until there are worse days. And that country is experiencing the same difficulties in this global phenomenon with the financial crisis and credit lockdown. And that person is now the hero because he actually was the one person standing up against the incredible tsunami saying spend all the money.
John, Michael had made some reference to how you see in the popular press this issue or that issue portrayed. One of the issues I've seen in the press is the discussion of earmarks and the flood of initiatives that we've had over the past years and even decades that identify revenue streams and earmark them to spending programs. And I'm just wondering if you might comment on what portion of the state's spending is actually controllable within the budget process versus how much of it is spent before the money even comes in?
That's the question that cannot be fully answered, and let me say why. Under Prop 98, which the voters passed, at least 40% of the money is directed towards K through 12 education, and then we usually spend another 10 to 12% for higher education here in California. Then about 25 to 27% of the state's budget is used for health services and social services. Now, do you have to spend that? No, right? A lot of people include that in the non-discretionary spending. Is it wise not to spend it? No. Now, why? Because sometimes for some of those programs, you'll get a match from the federal government from 2 to 1 to 8 to 1. So not only are we not spending $1, we're not getting $8 back from the federal government to enhance those types of programs. So you'll hear in terms of non-discretionary spending for the state budget anywhere from 4% to, or discretionary portion being 4% to 20%. Part of the reason is such a wide range, and why people can't answer the question is, when you have a match from the federal government at 8 to 1, technically you don't have to spend a single state dollar, but it's not wise to do so. And then to the front half of your question, I am a strong proponent of identifying the cost of programs and funding those programs. In fact, I have a bill that a legislator is carrying for me. The voters of California want to do the right thing. In fact, if you poll Californians, they're not different than their legislators. Part of the dysfunction you see with state government, people don't want to cut education. People don't want to put the aged, the blind, the seniors on the streets, but then they don't want to pay for it either, right? They don't want to increase their taxes. So they're caught in that same lock and bind that the elected officials are. Right? That's sort of the, Darrell Steinberg, the Senate President Pro Tem, who is, as nice a person as can be, he's responsible, right? And he wants to work with the governor and come to agreement. But I understand Darrell, at his core, he says, and we talk about it, right? Because it's a fundamental moral question to us. We put a senior, if you watch those television programs where the person's in a wheelchair hooked up, to breathe, you're in essence closing down the facility that he goes to the day. You're stopping the person who's treating him during the day. So when you end up his finances, he's on the street. That's what the debate is about.
Sort of a follow-up to that. So every time we go to the polls, there's at least half a dozen things on there that we have to vote about regarding finances. And I'm the type of person who, I hate it, so I just vote no on everything. Aren't the voters in California just a little bit delusional? Shouldn't we put a little bit more power in the legislature to fix the problems? I mean, we elect you guys. Isn't there anything that the legislation can do to make that process a little bit harder to get on the ballot so that voters don't take away more control?
You can do so. I think the elected officials don't want to do that because they're afraid of revolt by the voters. You know, it's part and parcel of what California has done for a long period of time, and it's currently under discussion, right? There's direct initiative and there's indirect initiative. Some of the alternatives that have been discussed is instead of a group or entity, right? And it's not all goodwill. A lot of it's changed the functional apparatus of the legislature. Some institutional presence in Sacramento who understand that they don't like the current composition of the legislature and the governor say, I'm not even going to try the deliberative process in the legislature because I know I won't be successful. I just want to take it straight to the voters. So part of the discussion is now not allowing those people to take it and put it on a ballot after getting 600,000 plus signatures, but make them go through the legislature. But there's still a lot of legislators who don't want to take away that opportunity for the voters of California to participate directly.
My name is Georgia. I filed for patents in 1999-2000 in U.S. Patent Office. Unfortunately, they still hold my patents. And in the recent 10 years, I lost 4 civil lawsuits. Based on my personal experience, I think there are 2 big issues the state government should pay attention to. One is the state and the local government should enforce immigration law and employment law. In California here, we have more than 7 million illegal immigrants already. That's about 20% California total population. This law is between me and the city of San Jose, because San Jose hired illegal immigrants as police officers and city attorney and a lot of other city staff. These illegal immigrants pay less tax or do not pay tax, but consume too much state money. Another issue is the corporation registration and the tax. I have one lawsuit against the Farmers Insurance, another one against the Night Reader, used to be America's second largest newspaper publisher. Night Reader have done business in San Jose here, headquartered here, but they didn't register with the state government.
I'm sorry, this last part I'm having a little difficulty.
Night Reader.
Can you speak a little, restate that?
Yeah.
Or just,
Yeah.
just ask the question that John...
Night Reader had headquartered in San Jose for 20 years, but they didn't register with state government, California government. They didn't pay state tax. In actual situation, more than 50% of U.S. public companies registered in Delaware. Most of them cheat on state tax and the local tax. I wonder what the state government and the local government should do to enforce immigration law and the tax law. What you think about what the government should do and what you want to improve, enforce the law?
Let me see if I get the gist of your question correct, and
I think there were 2 questions, John. One was, what's your attitude about illegal immigration? And then the second question was enforcing corporate tax obligations so people don't circumvent the process.
Yeah, well, America's a nation of laws, so we have to follow the laws. Now, there are other considerations in regards to immigration. Clearly, there are estimates of up to 12 million people here in the United States who are undocumented, right? Many of them perform an essential work function. So as President Obama has articulated, as others have articulated, and I support it, we need some process to allow them participation in this country in a legal fashion. Now, I also heard a subsidiary question about the responsibility of state and local government as to the enforcement of immigration. I have a hard time with that. That's a federal responsibility. I'm not trying to punt responsibilities because everybody has a responsibility in government. But you're exacting, at what point do you stop?
Like the mayor of San Francisco, Mayor of San Francisco, police chief, San Francisco, police chief, San Jose.
the Yeah, I wouldn't say we technically. I don't want to get into some import people into the state.
Yeah, let's go to the back and ask a good question.
Oh no, but I'll finish that. I'm not trying to avoid your question. As the controller, right, I care about what's on my plate of work. So if you have increased immigration responsibilities, at what point does that stop? Right, as an elected official, people just associate, you're an elected official. I understand people want me to handle a whole bunch of responsibilities, but I have to develop a body of expertise within my staff. So my body of expertise, in terms of accountants, in terms of auditors, right, and then if you overlay a responsibility of immigration, right, then give me the resources if you want to make me the immigration authority for the state of California. But don't impose responsibilities if I'm not specifically attached.
So, sorry, sir. Yeah, so, excuse me, can we, excuse me. Okay, thanks. So, we've got time for 3 more questions.
So in recent days, we've seen a debate between the governor and the speaker. The governor says that we should use this opportunity to make some reforms that will save us money in the future in the areas like pensions. The speaker has said, no, we have to focus only on solving the deficit now. Who's right?
Well, they're entitled to have that discussion. Here's part of my concern about that debate. You can't have a moving standard, right? They agree to a certain amount of issues at the beginning, and it's not as if the speaker said, I don't want to talk about those other issues. What she and Darrell said, we will talk about these issues, but let's talk about them in the future, right? We will have continuing discussions because California's economic situation is clearly going to deteriorate. After they fix this issue, they probably aren't going to wait for long before they have to enter the next set of discussions. But I understand the governor's long-term frustration on this stuff, but I understand the speaker's frustration now saying, hey, we were working on these 4 issues, and now you want to add 3 more. And you won't continue to discuss unless we have these 3 more. So that's an understanding that they're going to have to come to. Right? When I have discussions with the governor or the speaker, I said, hey, we're focused on 1 issue. Don't add 3 before you come to a final decision. Yes, sir.
At the outset, you mentioned $24 billion. We can solve the problem. The wolf's at the door. Michael mentioned 40 weeks plus or minus. Can you give us 2 or 3 really practical ways this is going to get solved before the wolf jumps into the house?
Well, just so you know, from a controller perspective, then I'll answer your question. I am agnostic as to the solutions. My responsibility, and I'm assessed by Wall Street on my performance, is that I need a sound budget that has cash solutions so that the state can pay its bills timely. Now, that being said, right, the choices are increased borrowing, and I've been a long-time opponent of increased borrowing for the state of California because, frankly, that's exacerbated the problem that we're in today. So you can increase taxes. Pragmatically, that's near off the table because you're not going to find additional votes, especially going into an election year from the Republican Party. And then you have to have spending cuts. Now, you're going to have to find some alternative solutions. What I have strongly advocated to the governor is that he enhance debt collection practices and he go through his agencies with fine-tuned go through it with a comb so that they enhance their spending practices. But most of it's going to have to come from spending cuts. But for instance, I audited 3 of the agencies for debt collection practices, Department of Industrial Relations, Public Utilities Commission, and the California Highway Patrol. They failed to collect $180 million in outstanding obligations. There's a few hundred government agencies. If they did all of that, perhaps we could find another $1 billion or $2 billion. It doesn't solve a $26 billion problem, but that starts to help the problem because you don't have a magic bullet that solves the entire solution. So you need to find $50 million here, $200 million here, $1 billion here.
So if you didn't pay a speeding ticket, John will take your money right now. We have time for one more question.
Thank you very much. Though I don't count Google and Yahoo among my venture investments, I have done many. And one of the things that I've found is the entrepreneurs often have a very optimistic point of view about what is just about to happen, the old hockey stick that's a couple of quarters out. And as a citizen and in the state of California, solving the budget deficit issue seems that there's not an anticipation of the shortfall in revenue that we are inevitably going to experience as a result of reduction in capital gains collections as well as income taxes. And I thought we sort of just solved the budget a few months ago, and then a yawning $24 billion opens up. I don't want to see an optimistic and rosy scenario, a naive venture capitalist perspective being taken by the state of California about what we, the private enterprise, are going to be able to produce in the way of profits to pay taxes. What is wrong with that budget process that has us anticipating more revenues than we're reasonably going to be able to generate on the private sector?
Yeah, actually one of the things to fix it, but you're exactly correct. When I became controller, I did something that was offensive to both parties. I actually started putting out my own numbers, even though it's my constitutional responsibility. And as I pointed out earlier, if you go onto my website, I post the state's number at least by the 10th of each month. So you get the public of California and everybody else who accesses my website gets the same information as the governor and the legislature do at the same time generally. So when I started that in my first month of office, some others in the executive branch were really upset with me for doing that. And they said, John, why are you doing that? I said, well, we had a budget deficit a few years ago, and the range between the numbers that were offered, frankly, to me, were offensive. How do you have honest public policy discussion in trying to resolve a very difficult situation if people are putting up their own numbers? And I was telling this particular office, at one point, you will support me. I know you're really upset with me, but you will support me. Now, a few months later, the other side was really mad at me. And I said back to the original side, see, now you want to use my numbers, right? And the good thing about me is that I told my staff, the 1,364 employees at the Controller's office, I wanted to be the best public fiscal office in the United States of America. You be professional, I'll handle the politics. And so over a period of time, Dan Walters, the conservative columnist from the Sacramento Bee, said, the office has the clearest sense of numbers is the Controller's office. If you saw the San Francisco Chronicle 2 weeks ago, they said the office that has been honest in handling all this whole thing is my professional staff. So Bank of America said we acted courageously during the February situation. And that's part of it. When the governor signed the budget in September of last year, 85 days late, and I'm not criticizing the governor is a very positive, optimistic, larger-than-life figure, right? He's the big cheerleader for California, right? I'm sort of I hate this term because it's not my person, but I become the doom and gloom guy for California, right? I said about the governor and the legislature's budget, it is out of balance the moment the governor signed it, right? We went from a $15.2 billion deficit at the beginning of this last fiscal year, no major tax increases, some spending cuts, not much borrowing. And so how do you go from $15.2 billion deficit to zero? And I said, that's not right. And they're saying, John, you're being doom and gloom again. A week later, the governor says the numbers are off by $1 billion, right? Because my numbers were going up pretty soon. A week later, a legislator says we're off by $4 billion. And then 2 weeks later, the governor says we're off by 14.8. So you're exactly right.
One final question from, this is the prerogative of the host, Donald Lewin from
Thanks.
Microsoft.
Mike opened with a question about whether the state was governable or not. And my question is, if you could wave a magic wand, there are 49 other states to look to that have models. Are there any other models out there if you could institute a new model, or if there was a convention that called for a new model and you could do that? Which ones work?
47 states are in fiscal trouble today. Part of it is what's happening at the macro effect. I don't think there's a state that has a model, but the things that I would point out, go back to majority vote, hold people accountable, extend term limits. I'd like to end term limits, but yeah.
Okay, so I think it's time to say thank you. Thank you very much for the check. And John, thank you too for doing what you feel is really right to serve the people of California.
Thank you, John and Michael, both, for sharing your views so candidly with us this morning. As a gesture of thanks, we have a special Churchill Club T-shirt for you.
Oh.
Please wear it in good health. And I would also like to once again thank our sponsor, Microsoft, and our co-host, Sonnenschein, and to all of you for coming. Have a great day.